Hey there YouTube, this is Phantom Outlaw coming at you with another review. As you can probably tell from the headline of this review, we are talking today about the Smith Wesson M&P Shield 45. Alright, so for many of you, you're already very much aware that this gun was coming out. It's not brand new exactly, it's been out for about, I guess, a month and a half or so now, but you're not finding it in too many places just yet. Let me go ahead and show you a quick picture of it here. As we look at this, you're going to see some differences throughout the grip itself as far as the texture and then the overall size. I do have some of the other shields here to go ahead and show you just so we can talk about the comparisons here in just a moment. We're going to talk about them first as I normally do. We're going to go over some of the specs, we're going to go over some of the stats, and then we'll get into the actual review itself. So let's talk about the actual dimensions of the gun. I'm going to reference the size of the 45 and then I'll reference also the size of the 9 and 40 because those two are the same. And then we can reference, identify the differences. First of all, the Shield 45 obviously is a 45 ACP caliber. The length is 6.45 inches. That's compared to the other Shield of 6.1. So overall, you're 0.34 inches longer. The height, 4.88, and that's with a flush magazine versus 4.6. So you're 0.28 inches taller. The width on the 45 is 0.99, whereas on the 9 and 40 it is 0.95. So not much difference there, 4/100ths of an inch. The barrel length on the 45, 3.3 inches. Barrel length on the 9 and 40, 3.1 inches. So slightly longer barrel, 0.2 inches longer. They're both striker fire actions. Alright, so as far as magazine capacity, I'm going to give a tip of the cap to Smith & Wesson on this one. With the Shield 9, you have 7 and 8, depending if you have the flush mount or the extended magazine. With the 40 caliber, you have 6 or 7. So one would think if you're going to continue that same trend with the 45 that you would be looking at a capacity of 5 and 6. However, Smith did a great job with the engineering of this and the fact that the 45 is just slightly larger. The magazine capacity of the 45 is in fact the same as it is on the 40. It is 6 and 7 depending which magazine you go with. So I want to give a tip of the hat, like I said, to Smith & Wesson on that one. Alright, the weight. A little bit of discrepancy on this. According to Smith & Wesson, it weighs 20.5 ounces empty. I don't have a scale. I have my hands. That's about all I've got for that. But I've read a number of other reviews where people seem to indicate that their empty weight is about 22 ounces. Not sure what the difference is. I'm not sure if there's a discrepancy with counting a magazine or not. I don't remember that being the issue. However, call it between 20 and 22 ounces empty and you get an idea for the weight. With the 9mm, it is 19 ounces. So you've got a couple of ounces, about 2.5 to 3 ounces difference in weight. Alright, another little difference on these two. With the previous shields, the finish on the slide and the barrel is called Black 68 HRC. I guess that's the hardness in the Rockwell scale. I'm not sure. They used to also call it Melanite finish, and I'm not sure if there's a difference in other than the name with it, but the finish on the 45 is now called Stainless Steel Armorite finish. I tell you, they look the same, so I'm not sure if there's any, maybe just a name change or a slightly different application in the chemical process. I really don't have that answer, but that is what Smith & Wesson is calling the finish. Again, that's Stainless Steel Armorite finish. It's kind of a mouthful. The frame is polymer on the 45 as it was on the 9 and the 40. Alright, so those are the specs or the stats. We've talked about what all that means in terms of numbers. Now let's actually talk about what it means in terms of the actual gun itself. When it comes to the 45, what we've got here is a slightly larger gun. We've already talked about you have a slight difference in the width. There's also a slight difference in the height and the length. Where that comes into play with this slightly taller height, the grip is able to hold the same amount of rounds as the 40 caliber does, which is a nice step up from what people anticipated being 5 and 6 on this one compared to the way the progression had gone previously. So what also that makes a difference is, I'm going to do this left-handed to show you, because the grip is slightly longer, this is the flush mount grip we've got in here. When I hold this gun, my pinky just barely has a spot to rest. Whereas with the previous shields, no way that was going to happen. We're talking about just a 1/4 of an inch or so difference here, but that makes a big difference in terms of what is able to get on the gun itself. So I'm able to get a fairly comfortable grip with the flush mount magazine. Now we'll go ahead and put on the extended one. With the extended magazine, you're going to see that there is plenty of room down here. So again, very comfortable with the extended magazine, as it was with the Shield 9 and 40. But as we go back to the flush magazine, there is still room for the pinky, albeit barely, but there is still space down there. One other difference that brings up when we talk about these magazines, this is the extended magazine for the 45. I'm not sure what you can see, but this is all one piece down here. When we look at the same magazine for the previous generation, you can see here it was two different pieces. And where that came into issues from time to time, I never experienced it, but I also have a couple different scenarios here. What came into happening, sometimes if this collar got pushed up just ever so slightly, I'm going to exaggerate so you can see the gap right here. When you put it into your gun, if you didn't ram it home, it may not seat all the way. So that could be a problem. Or if you got it maybe just barely seated right here in the front, it could pinch your hand when you hold it. Not the end of the world, but certainly uncomfortable. So the original Shield magazine with the extended magazines, there's two different pieces. The new one with the 45, it is one piece. So again, nice job with Smith & Wesson on that. I mentioned I had a couple alternatives. One of the other things you could do to this magazine with the old generation is you could glue this to this piece. However, then you're going to have taken it apart to be a real bear. So that's not recommended. Talon Grips offers grip tape that goes around this way, which kind of holds the top and the bottom together. I have that on one of my other magazines. I've never had any issues with that one or this one, to be honest with you, but you do have a choice. Alright, let's talk about what other of the differences that you've probably already noticed. We mentioned a slightly different grip texture. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you the grip texture on the original Shield. I'm trying to get the light to hit it just right. You can see there's large areas through here as well as here on the other side where there's just no grip. So this is my wife's Shield, which she's very happy carrying, no issues with it, as I said before. What I did with mine is I put the Talon grip tapes, the rubberized grip, on the grip. And what that does, it kind of fills in those areas where there was no texturing, so you have a little bit more comfortable way to hold the gun as far as the grip goes on it. A little bit softer, a little bit easier, no slip. With the new Shield, with the 45, you're going to see a distinctly different grip texture. I'm hoping that shows up there in the camera there, but there is a real different texture. This is a little bit more aggressive. It does fill in some of those holes. There's still a little bit up here, but as I hold this gun, it feels like it's a better purchase. It feels more secure in the hand. So for the time being, I'm going to let that go, and I'm going to go ahead and keep the original grips on there. I'm not going to change anything. In time, I may end up taking a look at the Talon grips for that one as well, but we don't know at this point just yet. So that's the major differences. Slightly longer, slightly taller, slightly wider. It does have a different grip texture. One other thing we haven't talked about yet, which I'm going to get to here in the pros, if you look right up here in the front, just ahead of my finger on this side, as well as on this side, there are front slide serrations. Alright, are they applicable? Do they really help? Is there a big difference? I think that's up to the individual. They're certainly there for aesthetic purposes. You can see the difference. It's very difficult to press check with that little bit on there and have it really be a big difference. You can do it. I'm not saying it's a game changer by any stretch. Alright, so let's talk real quickly about some of the pros and the cons. Again, this is strictly related to the 45 because I've already done a two-part lengthy video on the previous version. Alright, so let's talk about the pros here. The new grip texture we just spoke about, a little bit more aggressive, a whole different design. It covers more of the grip itself. I think most people are going to like it. Obviously the 45 is a larger caliber. You've got a much bigger bullet that can do a lot more damage. That does come with some additional recoil, to be sure. I'm going to get to that here in just a moment. I already talked about how I like the magazine capacity. It is still at 6 and 7 depending on the magazine, as it was with the 40. I think that's a big plus. I'm going to cover that here in a minute for comparison. Because it is slightly larger, the pinky does have a spot to hold on to in the grip. It's a very small spot, but it does help. I like that. Alright, price point. The MSRP on this from Smith & Wesson is $479. You're going to find that less than that, and in some cases a lot less than that, out and about in the various stores. The issue is, at least at this time, they're really hard to come across. They're being produced, they're being shipped out, but they're selling very, very quickly. So right now the price point may be a little bit higher than that, not the MSRP, but higher than where it will settle into. But I suspect you're going to end up finding it in the $425 to $440 range. Time will tell on that. We've mentioned the new front slide serrations. Again, some people really like that. Other people just, blah, it is what it is. We've talked about how on the extended magazine, the floor plate is one piece instead of two. I think that's another big plus. Again, Smith & Wesson deserves credit for that. It is still a single stack design. Obviously, it's a shield. The shield from Smith & Wesson is a single stack pistol. That makes for much easier concealment. It's a fantastic carry gun. Alright, actually, as far as the cons, the negatives, I don't really have a whole lot. It is a slightly larger gun. I mentioned that as a pro, it's also a con. The pros are that it fits your hand a little bit better, it helps minimize the recoil, it's a little bit bigger gun. But it's a little bit bigger gun, which means it's a little bit heavier gun, and for some people that's going to be a takeaway that they're not going to be happy with, and they may deter them from carrying. Again, not a big deal in most people's minds, I don't believe so. Another negative or another con at this time, and here we are in mid-August of 2016, there is no Performance Center version of this gun. The Performance Center version of the 9 and the 40 came out this past spring and has been pretty popular. However, for the 45, at this point, there is no Performance Center version of that. What does that mean? It doesn't have the fiber optic sights, it doesn't have the enhanced trigger, and it doesn't have the ported barrel and slide. That last point is probably the one that most people would appreciate from this to help keep the muzzle flip down, but time will tell, we may end up seeing that. Alright, so let's talk about a real straightforward comparison. And I don't have it anymore because I did sell it to get this one, but you've seen my video if you've watched it on the Springfield XDS 45. So that's what I'm going to use as comparisons. Now, there's two different versions of the XDS 45. There's the 3.3 inch and there's the 4.0. I had the 4.0, and as I mentioned in the video, one of the reasons I like that is because with that extended barrel being 0.7 inches longer, it did help with to reduce the recoil and with the muzzle flip a bit. I was a big proponent of that, and I probably still would be at this time if I had it to do over. That is not an option for this one. As we mentioned, the barrel length on this one is 3.3 inches. The overall length on this one is still slightly shorter than the 4.0 inch version of the XDS. I got to tell you, having shot them all, I don't mind the XDS. I didn't sell it because I didn't like shooting it. I sold it because I didn't see me carrying it. I had the Shield 9mm. I carried the XDS just a handful of times and ended up becoming a safe queen, so that's why I ended up getting rid of it. This one I envision carrying more often because it's identical in size, for the most part, to the regular Shield. For instance, I have one inside the waist holster right here, which is this one. I've had this for a couple years now for the Shield 9, but as we're about to see, and I have not touched or changed anything on this holster. 45 fits just fine, and as I'm moving it around, it's not popping out, but it does slide right out. So I can't speak for all different holsters out there. I have two other holsters that I've also tried, and it works just fine for it. I just didn't want to clutter up the table here for the review with those. But so far, those other carry holsters that I use for the 9 also seem to be able to accommodate the 45. I can't speak for all of them, but at least in those small cases, we seem to be okay. So because of that, it seemed like a more natural element for me to go with or progress with to have the 45 in this Shield. I'm very happy with that. Alright, I've mentioned the recoil a couple times. Yes, there's recoil. Yes, this is a 45. Yes, it's a powerful round. But because the gun itself is bigger and heavier, albeit slightly, than the 9mm and the 40 caliber, that additional recoil, for the most part, is mitigated. Now, the 9mm I never thought had a lot of recoil to begin with. As I mentioned in my previous review, I did notice some recoil or the slap or the snappiness from the 40 caliber Shield that I was not as crazy with. I do not see it in the same way with this one. There is more recoil on this than there is on the 9mm, to be sure. But it's not so much more to the point that it's unshootable or impossible to aim. Actually, I really didn't have any issues with it. I think I mentioned in my XDS video that XDS had a much more aggressive texture to the grips, and I put the Talon grip, rubberized grip texture on that one as well, and it helped soften up some of that recoil there. I've heard people say that shooting the XDS 45 tears up your hand, and if you shoot more than 50 rounds to it, you're going to have your palm will bleed. and all kinds of issues like that. I never experienced anything like that, but at the same time, I also never sat down and put 300 or 400 rounds through it at one sitting. I'm not sure if anybody would want to do that. But to put 50 or 75 or even 100 rounds through the XCS, I never had problems. 100 rounds through the Shield, no problems. It is a different texture for sure. There is no rubberized texture at this point. I don't think I'm going to need that. I really like the way the gun feels. There is some muzzle flip, but it's manageable. There is recoil, but it's manageable. It is more so than the 9mm, but not to the point that it's a turnoff. I've already mentioned that, and I think I have to drive that point home. The recoil on the Shield 45 is more than it is on the Shield 9, but not to the point where you are deterred from owning it or shooting it. Does that make sense? That being said, I would not recommend the Shield 45 as the first gun for a first shooter. If you're brand new to shooting, don't ever start with the 40 or 45. Unless it's a 1911, if you're going to pull a trigger on that, it's going to be a sweet, smooth shooting gun. But for a carry gun, go 9mm. Or get used to recoil before you step up to the plate to grab a smaller 45 for sure. I think that's common sense, and most people would certainly agree with that. So in wrapping up the opinion on this, again, it's a slightly bigger gun than the regular Shield, but it still shares a lot of the characteristics. This particular one does have the external thumb safety. There is a version available without the thumb safety. They seem to be much harder to find. As I've mentioned in my other videos, I am not a fan of safeties. I don't use them. That's just one more step that I have to remember in a defensive situation. That being said, I'm not here to try to have anybody decide what's right or wrong based on my opinion. It's just that, my opinion. For me, I don't use safeties. It doesn't bother me on the Shields to have the safety because it is the flush mount safety. This safety does not extend outside the frame at all. So it's not, I'm pushing up against that pretty good. Right there, you have to really get your thumb on it to get it to actuate or one way or the other. So I'm very comfortable with that point. I like the fact that I can have that safety turned off, put it in my holster, and when I draw the gun, not have to worry that the safety turn itself on or off. Some of the other external thumb safeties stick out 1/8 of an inch or so in some of these guns, and to me, you just don't know what state they're going to be in if you have to draw it. So anyhow, this one does have the thumb safety included. Again, I'm going to leave it turned off, and I'll be fine with that. This breaks down in field strips the same as the other Shields. There's no differences there. So if you're already familiar with that, you're going to have the same situation going on here. Again, very straightforward, very simple, very easy, no problems whatsoever for field stripping and cleaning. Again, limited time right now. It's a smooth shooter, especially considering what it is. No real major issues with that. I think it's a great choice. You can't go wrong with it. It is a Smith & Wesson Shield, so you've already got that 4 or so years of track record to stand behind on that. For the most part, I think it can be a worry-free concern. You know, we're all going to have our own situation with that, and as the phrase is, your mileage may vary. But in the reviews and feedback I've gotten so far on the 45 is it's just another Shield. No problems, no worries. It's a lot of pluses for it. People really seem to like it so far, and time will tell with that. So that's the review of the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield 45. As always, if you have any questions, please drop me a line below, and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. I hope you're all doing well. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great day.